Valentine's Day, a night for love, for candlelit dinners and whispered promises. A night where couples celebrate devotion, where laughter fills the air, where hearts beat in time with each other. But inside one suburban home, love had died long before this night began. The house, once a symbol of warmth and security, now held something else. An unease, a quiet tension lurking beneath the surface. It clung to the walls, settled into the shadows, waiting. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. By the time the night was over, the quiet would be shattered by the deafening crack of gunfire. By the time the police arrived, blood would stain the floors, and a family would be forever destroyed. And at the center of it all, Detective Vanessa Reed, a name that once commanded respect, a woman known for her sharp instincts, her unwavering sense of justice. For 10 years, she had served her community with pride, putting criminals behind bars, protecting the innocent. She had stood on crime scenes, comforting victims. She had testified in courtrooms, her voice steady, her resolve unshakable. She had spent her life fighting for what was right. But on this night, Vanessa Reed would become the very thing she had sworn to stop. How does a decorated detective, a devoted wife and mother, end up in handcuffs, accused of murder? To those who knew her, Vanessa was more than just a cop. She was a wife to Daniel Reed, a successful businessman, and the mother of a 13-year-old daughter, Lily. A woman who worked long hours, yet somehow always found the time to tuck her child into bed. Who sat in the audience at school recitals, cheering Lily on. Who cooked breakfast before heading out for another grueling shift at the precinct. To outsiders, the Reeds had it all. A beautiful home, luxury vacations, a picture-perfect family. A marriage built on love, trust, and loyalty. But beneath the surface, something was terribly wrong. By the time the first responders arrived at the scene that night, Vanessa was still clutching the gun. Her hands trembled, her breath came in shallow gasps. The body on the floor, Daniel Reed, lay in a growing pool of blood. The officers who entered the home didn't see the respected detective they had worked alongside for years. They saw something else entirely. A woman transformed. A woman whose world had just imploded. Her weapon, standard issue, department approved, still had smoke curling from the barrel. The room reeked of gunpowder. What had happened in this house? What could drive a woman, trained to uphold the law, bound by an oath to serve and protect, to cross the ultimate line? Was it a moment of blind, uncontrollable rage? The shocking unraveling of years of betrayal? Or had the truth been buried deep, building for so long that when it finally surfaced, it did so with violent, unstoppable force? Vanessa Reed was no stranger to crime scenes. She had walked through houses where lovers had turned on each other in the heat of passion. She had seen jealousy ignite into violence. She had heard confessions from people who swore they had only snapped for a moment, just one moment, and now their lives were over. But she had always been the one standing on the outside, looking in. Tonight, she was the crime scene. What happened inside that house? Was it the desperate act of a mother protecting her daughter? Or was there something much darker lurking beneath the surface? This case forces us to ask an uncomfortable question, one that lingers long after the headlines fade. How well do we truly know the people we love? Before we unravel the chilling details of that night, make sure to like this video and subscribe to True Crime Insider, where we expose the real-life cases that reveal the darkest corners of human nature. Because sometimes, the most terrifying monsters aren't strangers in the dark. They're the ones sleeping right beside us. Detective Vanessa Reed was the kind of officer people trusted. In a world where justice often felt elusive, she was a beacon of certainty. A woman who had seen the worst of humanity, but never let it break her. Over 10 years on the force, she had built a reputation for sharp instincts, unwavering composure, and an unrelenting drive to bring criminals to justice. She had faced killers, liars, and broken men who thought they could outsmart her. None of them ever did. But Vanessa wasn't just a detective. She was a mother, a wife, a woman with a life beyond the badge. And no matter how much tragedy she witnessed, she had always believed that home was her sanctuary. Her husband, Daniel Reed, was the other half of that carefully built life. A successful real estate broker, Daniel had the kind of effortless charm that made people trust him instantly. He was ambitious, confident, and well-liked, a man who knew how to make people feel important. When he walked into a room, people gravitated toward him. He had a presence, a magnetism that made clients want to buy from him, colleagues want to work with him, and friends want to be around him. For years, he had been Vanessa's rock. They had met in their 20s, back when she was just a rookie cop trying to prove herself in a male-dominated world, and he was a young real estate agent on the rise. He had pursued her relentlessly, winning her over with his humor, his charm, and his quiet confidence. Their love had been electric in the beginning, the kind of connection that made people believe in fate. Together, they had built what seemed like the perfect life. A sprawling home in an affluent neighborhood, weekend getaways to their favorite cabin in the mountains, dinner parties with friends who envied the effortless way they fit together. They were the couple everyone admired, the detective and the businessman, a power couple who had it all. But more than anything, Vanessa's world revolved around their daughter, 13-year-old Lily. From the moment she was born, Lily had been Vanessa's reason for everything. She worked long hours, sometimes pulling all-night shifts on homicide cases, yet she always made it home in time to tuck Lily into bed. No matter how exhausted she was, she would run her fingers through Lily's dark curls, press a kiss to her forehead, and whisper, "I love you." It was their ritual, their quiet promise that no matter what horrors Vanessa saw in the world, their home would always be safe. Lily had always been a bright, creative child. She loved to draw, filling sketchbooks with elaborate scenes of fantasy worlds and delicate portraits of people she observed in coffee shops or at the park. She had a quiet confidence about her, a thoughtful way of looking at the world that reminded Vanessa of herself when she was younger. For a long time, their home had been filled with laughter, with warmth, with the kind of love that Vanessa had always dreamed of having. She had grown up in a broken home, raised by a mother who worked 3 jobs just to keep the lights on, and a father who had disappeared before she could even remember his face. She had promised herself that her own daughter would never know that kind of instability, that she would give Lily everything she never had. And for years, she had believed she was succeeding. But then, things began to shift. At first it was subtle. The way Daniel's smile didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. The hush phone calls late at night. The lingering scent of perfume on his shirts, not hers. The way he'd pull away when she reached for his hand. Just slightly, but enough for her to notice. Vanessa had spent years chasing criminals, studying their behaviors, dissecting the small inconsistencies in their stories. And now, those same warning signs were in her own home. She wanted to believe it was just the natural ebb and flow of marriage, the result of 2 people caught up in the demands of their careers. Maybe they had just grown distant, caught in the chaos of their busy lives. But deep down, she knew better. One night, as she lay awake beside him, listening to the rhythmic rise and fall of his breathing, she stared at the ceiling and tried to pinpoint the moment things had changed. Had it been gradual? A slow unraveling of something that had once been strong? Or had she missed something? Something obvious? Something glaring? She thought back to the business trips he had started taking more frequently, the excuses about last-minute meetings that kept him out late, the way he always seemed to be looking at his phone, smiling at messages he never shared with her. Her instincts, those razor-sharp instincts that had made her one of the best detectives in her precinct, were telling her something was off. And then there was Lily. Lately, her daughter had been different. Withdrawn. She spent more time in her room, her once constant chatter replaced by silence. She avoided eye contact, flinched when Vanessa reached out to touch her shoulder. Vanessa had asked more than once if something was wrong. Lily always shook her head. "Are you fine?" But she wasn't fine. One evening, Vanessa had walked past Lily's room and paused at the doorway. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, Lily sat on her bed, her knees pulled to her chest, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She hadn't noticed Vanessa watching. That was the first time Vanessa felt the fear settle deep in her bones. The second time was worse. She had come home late from a case and found Lily curled up on the couch, fast asleep. But it wasn't the sight of her daughter sleeping that made Vanessa's stomach drop. It was the way she was curled in on herself, arms wrapped protectively around her body, as if she were trying to disappear. Vanessa had bent down, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's forehead. Lily had jolted awake with a gasp, eyes wide with panic. And then, when she realized it was just her mother, she exhaled sharply, forcing a shaky smile. "Bad dream," she had mumbled. Vanessa had wanted to believe her, but deep down, she knew the truth. Lily wasn't scared of nightmares. She was scared of something or someone in their home. And soon, the truth would reveal itself in the most horrifying way imaginable. The day had started like any other. Vanessa Reed woke early, slipping out of bed before the alarm, her body accustomed to the rigid schedule of a detective's life. She brewed her coffee in silence, scrolling through the latest case updates on her phone. A double homicide in the next town over, a missing girl last seen at a gas station, stories of violence and loss, the kind she had dedicated her life to solving. She was used to carrying the weight of other people's tragedies. But lately, the weight inside her own home had become heavier. Lily had been quiet at breakfast. Too quiet. She picked at her toast, her shoulders slightly hunched, her eyes fixed on the table. It wasn't unusual for a 13-year-old to withdraw, but this felt different. There was a tightness in Lily's posture, a fear buried just beneath the surface. Vanessa had noticed it before, the way her daughter had started spending more time in her room, the way she flinched at sudden sounds. But every time she tried to bring it up, Lily would shake her head and offer a quick, unconvincing smile. "Are you fine?" Well, she wasn't fine. Vanessa had spent years learning how to read people, suspects, witnesses, victims. And her daughter was hiding something. Daniel had noticed too. At least he claimed he had. "She's just growing up," he had said the night before, lounging on the couch with his whiskey in hand. "Teenagers get moody. You remember what it was like." But Vanessa didn't believe it. Not for a second. Because it wasn't just Lily. It was him too. The late-night texts. The hush phone calls. The way he had started locking his office door when he never used to. It was small things at first, but the pieces weren't adding up. And yet, she ignored it. She didn't have proof, just a gut feeling. And as a detective, she had learned to trust her instincts. So, why hadn't she trusted them about her own husband? It had been a long day. A string of back-to-back meetings, a frustrating case that seemed to be going nowhere, and the nagging exhaustion that came from years of chasing criminals. But tonight was supposed to be different. Vanessa had planned a surprise. Something simple, something to remind Daniel that despite their busy lives, despite the stress, they were still them. She left work early, picking up a bottle of his favorite wine and the chocolate mousse he loved from the bakery on 5th Street. She told herself it was enough. That whatever tension had been building between them would fade over a good meal, a few shared laughs, and the reminder that they had built a life together. But as soon as she stepped through the front door, she knew something was wrong. The house was silent. Too silent. No soft hum of the TV, no distant rustling from Lily's room, no signs of life at all. Vanessa set the dessert box on the counter, her fingers tightening around the paper edges. Something in the air felt off. She stepped out of her heels, moving barefoot across the hardwood floor, her senses heightening. Years of working in law enforcement had sharpened her instincts. She could feel when something wasn't right, like the static before a storm. Then she heard it, a voice, low, muffled, coming from upstairs. Her pulse quickened. She moved without thinking, her steps silent against the floor. The closer she got, the clearer the voices became. Then, something else. A small, broken sound. Vanessa froze. Lily. Her body went cold. She moved faster, taking the stairs 2 at a time, her heart pounding against her ribs. Then silence. A deep, suffocating silence that made her breath catch in her throat. Vanessa hesitated outside the bedroom door, her fingers hovering over the handle. A part of her wanted to turn away, to pretend she hadn't heard anything. Because if she opened that door, there would be no going back. But she had to. She pushed the door open, and the world she knew ended. Daniel. Lily. The bed. Lily's face streaked with tears, her small frame trembling. Her fingers twisted in the sheets, white-knuckled, frozen in place. Trapped. For a second, time fractured. Everything slowed. Daniel turned first. His shirt was half-buttoned, his belt unlooped, his body still hovering between two realities. The one where he had gotten away with it and the one where he had just been caught. His eyes met Vanessa's, and she saw it. Not guilt, not regret, not even fear, just calculation. Vanessa, this isn't. Her stomach lurched. This wasn't the first time. A scream tore from her throat. What the hell is this? Lily flinched, curling in on herself. As if trying to disappear, Daniel took a step forward, hands raised. Just listen to me. But she wasn't listening. She was already reaching for her gun. Her breath came in sharp bursts. Her fingers curled around the grip. Her vision blurred, everything narrowing to the man standing in front of her. She barely registered the way his expression shifted. First to fear, then to something else. Even now, even caught, he still thought he could talk his way out of this. Vanessa, put the gun down. This isn't what you think. His voice was steady, too steady, as if he had practiced this moment, as if he had planned for it. And suddenly she saw it. All of it. The late nights, the secrecy, the way Lily had pulled away, her laughter disappearing one whisper at a time. The signs had been there. She had ignored them. She had failed. Daniel moved again. Just an inch. Just enough. She pulled the trigger. The gunshot ripped through the silence. The first bullet hit him in the chest. Daniel staggered, eyes wide with disbelief. She fired again, and again, and again. 15 shots, each one carrying the weight of betrayal, of rage, of heartbreak. The final bullet echoed through the room, ringing in her ears. Daniel slumped to the floor. Blood pooled beneath him, dark and thick, staining the white carpet. It was over. The gun felt heavy in Vanessa's hands. Lily hadn't moved. She stood there, frozen, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her arms wrapped around herself. Then sirens. Distant at first, then growing louder. Vanessa barely registered the flashing red and blue lights outside, the blur of movement beyond the window. The front door burst open. "Drop your weapon." She turned, her grip loosening. The gun slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor with a dull thud. The officers moved in, her own colleagues, men and women she had worked beside, people who had trusted her. Now, their hands were on her, pulling her down, locking cold steel around her wrists. She didn't fight. She didn't speak. They led her past Daniel's lifeless body, past the shattered glass of their wedding photo, through the home that was no longer a home. Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters swarmed. Neighbors whispered. That's Detective Vanessa Reed, a trusted officer, a respected cop, now a killer. But was she? Or was she something else? A mother who had done what the law could not. A woman who had refused to turn away. The courtroom was packed. The air crackled with anticipation. Every seat filled with reporters, legal analysts, and spectators who had followed every detail of the case. Camera flashes flickered from outside the courthouse, barely held at bay by the security officers stationed at every entrance. The weight of unspoken truths pressed down on everyone inside. At the defense table, Vanessa Reed sat with her hands cuffed in her lap. Her once pristine posture was gone, replaced by a quiet exhaustion that seeped into her bones. She had spent her entire career sitting on the other side of the courtroom, fighting for justice, ensuring that victims had their day in court. Now she was the accused. Across the room, Lily sat in the front row, her small frame hunched beneath the burden of something far heavier than her 13 years. She had barely spoken since that night. Not to family, not to therapists, not even to Vanessa during their brief, monitored visits. The once vibrant girl who filled sketchbooks with fantasy worlds now sat motionless, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her expression unreadable. Vanessa's attorney leaned over, whispering, "She's our only chance." Vanessa nodded stiffly. She knew it was true. Then came the moment the entire courtroom had been waiting for. Lily was called to the stand. She hesitated. For a brief second, her gaze flickered to Vanessa, a silent question hanging between them. Vanessa's heart pounded as she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. With slow, measured steps, Lily rose from her seat. The sound of her sneakers tapping against the polished floor was the only noise in the room. The weight of every eye in the courtroom was on her, but she kept walking, kept moving, kept breathing. She reached the witness stand and sat down. The bailiff swore her in, his voice firm but gentle. Lily's fingers trembled as she placed them in her lap. The courtroom was silent. Vanessa forced herself to stay still, to keep her expression neutral. She wanted to run to her daughter, to hold her, to take away all the pain she had endured. But she couldn't. The defense attorney approached, his voice measured, careful. "Lily, can you tell us about your father?" A deep, shuddering breath. Lily's hands twisted together, her knuckles white. "He wasn't who everyone thought he was." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens scratching against their notepads. The prosecutor's jaw tightened. Vanessa barely breathed. The attorney pressed on. "Can you explain what you mean by that?" Lily's fingers clenched. She looked down, her shoulders shaking. For a long moment, a sharp sob broke from the back of the courtroom. Vanessa didn't have to look to know it was one of her family members. Maybe her sister, maybe her mother. Lily swallowed hard. Her voice wavered but didn't break. "He told me that if I told my mom, she'd hate me, that it would ruin everything." The words sliced through Vanessa like a blade. The prosecutor's expression didn't change, but the tension in the room shifted. The carefully constructed narrative they had built, the story of a jealous, vengeful wife who had murdered her husband in cold blood, was unraveling. The attorney took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Did you ever tell your mother what was happening?" Lily shook her head. "Why not?" A pause. Then, because he said she'd lose everything. Silence. Vanessa could feel her attorney's confidence growing. This was what they had needed. The truth. The prosecutor didn't cross-examine. He didn't need to. The damage had already been done. And then, the verdict. The judge's voice was steady, emotionless. "Vanessa Reed, we find you guilty of voluntary manslaughter." The words landed like a hammer. Vanessa closed her eyes. The room erupted in whispers. A sharp cry rang out from the back of the courtroom. Her mother. The judge continued, his voice firm. 25 years in prison. A pause. Possibility of parole after 15. 15 years. Lily would be an adult by then. A different person. Would she be okay? Would she heal? Vanessa exhaled slowly, her body going numb. The bailiff stepped toward her. But for one brief moment, she wasn't thinking about the cuffs, the years ahead, the walls that would close in around her. She turned, searching the room. Lily's eyes met hers. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. Instead, she mouthed, "I love you." Tears shimmered in her eyes. For the first time in months, Vanessa saw something in her daughter's face that hadn't been there since before that night. Relief. Maybe even hope. Was Vanessa's crime one of passion or protection? Did the law fail her and her daughter? What would you have done? Let us know in the comments. And if this case shocked you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime stories that will leave you speechless.